Welcome to the deep dive. When you sent in this Wikipedia article about Martin Lee Sanders, I knew we were in for a heavy one.
Yeah,
Serial killers are always a tough topic, but there's something that true crime fans like yourself are drawn to.
it's a natural human fascination, isn't it? This morbid curiosity about the darkest parts of human behavior.
Yeah,
But, as we unpack this case, it's important to remember the real lives lost
right.
and the lasting impact on the victims' families.
Exactly. We're going to do our best to treat this information with the respect it deserves, but also get into some of the more fascinating details. The
Right.
kind of stuff that makes you think, wow, I never considered that.
I think you'll find this particular case raises some very interesting points,
Okay.
especially about the challenges of criminal investigations in the 80s, before things like national DNA databases
Right.
and widespread interagency communication.
Okay, let's start with the basics, which I know you're already familiar with from the Wikipedia article.
Sure.
Martin Lee Sanders, born in 1952, worked as a truck driver, and that detail right there, his occupation, ends up being hugely significant.
It's actually a recurring theme in serial killer cases.
Yeah,
You think about it, truck driving provides a unique combination of mobility and anonymity.
right.
You're constantly on the move, crossing state lines, often alone.
Yeah.
It's tragically perfect for someone looking to evade detection.
Now, the article doesn't tell us a whole lot about Sanders' early life, but absence of information is almost as intriguing as information itself.
It's true.
What factors might have contributed to his later actions? It's something to consider.
It's tempting to try to pinpoint one specific event or trauma,
Right.
but the reality is far more complex.
Yeah.
The path to becoming a serial offender is rarely linear.
Right.
It's usually a tangled web of individual predispositions, environmental influences,
Sure.
and perhaps even just plain bad luck.
Yeah, in 1980, the story takes a dark turn.
Okay.
Two young women, Marsha Wooter, 18, and Kathy Allen, just 19, were hitchhiking across the western United States. They even promised their parents they'd be home by April 6th.
Adding that detail about their promise to be home really personalizes the story, doesn't it?
It does.
You could just imagine the mounting worry their families must have felt when they didn't show up.
It's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
They were last seen at a restaurant in Ritzville, Washington. Their parents, desperate for answers, hired investigators, but the trail went cold.
Right.
For over a year, there was nothing.
And then there's this intriguing detail about a Reverend Robert William Reed who claimed to have psychic abilities.
Oh, wow.
He believed he knew where the women had been abducted.
Psychics and law enforcement's always a controversial mix.
It is.
Do they actually help solve cases, or do they just muddy the waters?
Well, it's certainly not standard procedure,
Right.
and many in law enforcement remain skeptical.
Sure.
The problem is that relying on psychic information,
Right.
which can be subjective and difficult to verify, can sometimes divert resources away from more proven investigative techniques.
Sadly, the story doesn't have a happy ending.
Okay.
Over a year after their disappearance, the bodies of Marcia and Kathy were found along Interstate 90. And get this, they were covered in ash from the Mount St. Helens eruption,
Oh, wow.
which had happened just a few months after they went missing.
That detail is both chilling and incredibly poignant.
Yeah.
It speaks to the random cruelty of fate,
Right.
a natural disaster overshadowing a human tragedy,
Right.
and from an investigative standpoint, potentially contaminating valuable evidence.
Moving on to 1983, another tragedy unfolded, this time in Spokane, Washington. Two 15-year-old girls, Rhonda Rima and Elizabeth Marks, vanished from the Lilac Festival Carnival.
Again, young women disappearing under seemingly ordinary circumstances.
Yeah.
It's the kind of case that grips a community with fear, because it suggests that danger can lurk anywhere,
Right.
even in a place meant for fun and celebration.
For 3 long weeks, the community searched desperately, clinging to hope.
Yeah.
But that hope was shattered when their bodies were found in the Spokane River. You can only imagine the collective grief and the lingering fear that must have permeated the city.
And at this point, if we step back and look at the bigger picture,
Yeah.
we start to see some disturbing patterns emerging.
Yeah, exactly. These weren't just isolated incidents.
Uh-huh.
Young female victims, locations near major highways.
Yeah.
It's starting to feel like more than just a coincidence.
Especially when you consider Sanders' occupation.
Right.
His truck driving routes likely took him through these very areas,
Yeah.
giving him access to potential victims and making his movements harder to track.
It's a horrifying thought, but it makes you start to connect the dots.
It does.
And unfortunately, this is just the beginning.
Right.
The story takes another dark turn in 1986 with an incident that reveals a clear escalation in Sanders' crimes.
And this is where his luck starts to run out.
Yeah.
Although no one knows it yet.
So in 1986, Sanders is in Missoula, Montana,
Right.
and kidnaps 2 hitchhikers at gunpoint.
This is where we see a chilling escalation in his crimes.
Yeah.
He's no longer just taking advantage of opportunity. He's actively hunting and controlling his victims.
And the details are terrifying.
Yeah.
He uses an unloaded gun and handcuffs,
Wow.
then rapes one of the victims in the sleeping compartment of his truck. You can practically feel the fear these women must have experienced.
It's a clear indication that his inhibitions are eroding.
Yeah.
The unloaded gun suggests a level of arrogance.
Right.
He doesn't even believe he needs bullets to exert his power.
Right.
And using the sleeping compartment of his truck,
Right.
his own personal space,
Yeah.
as the location for the assault, that speaks volumes about his distorted sense of ownership and control.
Thankfully, this time there's a different outcome.
Okay.
He's arrested in Wyoming thanks to these brave women reporting the crime and then extradited back to Montana.
This arrest was a crucial turning point.
Yeah.
Although at the time, investigators in Montana had no idea that they had apprehended a suspected serial killer.
Right.
They were focused on the kidnapping and assault charges. This is a classic example of what we call linkage blindness,
Oh.
where law enforcement agencies fail to connect seemingly unrelated crimes committed by the same person,
Right.
often because they occur in different jurisdictions.
This concept of linkage blindness is fascinating and kind of terrifying.
It is.
You're saying that back in the 80s, before national databases and task forces dedicated to serial crimes,
Right.
it was much harder to spot these patterns.
Exactly. Information wasn't shared as readily or efficiently.
Yeah.
So a crime in Washington might not be connected to a similar crime in Montana, even if the same person was responsible.
Right.
It allowed predators like Sanders to operate with a sense of impunity,
Yeah.
believing they could simply melt back into the vastness of the highway system.
It's mind-boggling to think how many cases might have gone unsolved simply because the right hand wasn't talking to the left hand, so to speak.
It's a sobering thought,
Yeah.
and it underscores the importance of the advancements we've made in criminal justice.
Yeah.
But also the need for constant vigilance and improvement.
So Sanders is in prison for the kidnapping and assault.
Right.
But the story doesn't end there.
It doesn't.
3 years later, in 1989, he makes a fateful mistake.
Okay.
He confesses.
It's a pattern we see time and again with serial offenders.
Yeah.
They get caught because they can't resist the urge to boast,
Right.
to relive their crimes, to validate their own sense of power and control.
And he chooses the worst possible confidant,
Yeah,
his cellmate.
never a good idea, especially when you've committed multiple murders.
He spills the beans about killing Rhonda Rima and Elizabeth Marks in Spokane, even revealing details that only the killer would know.
Right.
Thankfully, his cellmate had a conscience and alerted the authorities.
This is where the wheels of justice finally start turning in the right direction.
Sanders is extradited to Washington to face trial for the 1983 murders.
Right.
And to avoid the death penalty, he pleads guilty to the Spokane murders and admits his involvement in the 1980 killings of Marcia Water and Kathy Allen. He receives a life sentence.
A guilty plea in these cases is often a strategic move.
Yeah.
It spares the victims' families the trauma of a lengthy trial
Right.
and the uncertainty of a jury verdict, while still ensuring that the perpetrator is held accountable for his crimes.
It's a small consolation, but at least it brings some measure of closure to the families, knowing that the man responsible for their loved ones' deaths is behind bars.
I think it's important to pause here and reflect on the profound impact these crimes had,
Yeah.
not just on the victims themselves, but on their families and the communities where these tragedies occurred.
You're right. We've focused a lot on Sanders and the details of his crimes.
Right.
But the real story here is about the lives that were cut short, the family left behind to pick up the pieces,
Yeah.
and the ripple effects of grief and fear that spread throughout these communities.
Imagine the agonizing years of uncertainty for the families of Marcia Weeder and Kathy Allen,
Yeah.
not knowing what happened to their daughters, clinging to hope,
Yeah.
then having that hope dashed when their bodies were finally found,
Right.
and then having to process the news that their deaths were not simply a tragic accident,
Right.
but the result of a calculated act of violence by a serial killer.
And the families of Rhonda Rima and Elizabeth Marks.
Yeah.
To have your teenage daughters snatched away from a carnival,
Right.
a place meant for laughter and joy,
Yeah.
and to endure weeks of searching, clinging to hope,
Yeah.
only to have their bodies discovered in the river. It's unbearable to even contemplate.
And beyond the immediate families,
Right.
these crimes left scars on entire communities.
Yeah.
Spokane, in particular, was shaken to its core.
Yeah.
The Lilac Festival, once a symbol of springtime and celebration, became forever tainted by tragedy.
Right.
Parents became more protective, children more fearful.
It's a stark reminder that the actions of one person can have far-reaching consequences,
Right.
impacting the lives of countless others in ways we may never fully comprehend.
Absolutely. And it underscores the importance of empathy and compassion.
Yeah.
When we delve into cases like this,
Right.
it's easy to get caught up at the forensic details, the psychological profiles,
Right.
the thrill of the chase. But we must never forget the human cost.
Right.
Behind every headline, every police report, every court transcript, there are real people
Right.
whose lives have been irrevocably shattered.
It's a powerful message and one that I think we all need to keep in mind.
Yeah.
Not just when we're discussing true crime,
Right.
but in our everyday lives. We never know the burdens others are carrying, the pain they may be hiding.
It's true.
A little kindness and understanding can go a long way.
Well said. Now, going back to Sanders, after his sentencing, he essentially disappears from public view.
Right.
He spends the rest of his life incarcerated at the Coyote Ridge Correctional Center in Connell, Washington.
It seems almost anticlimactic after all the twists and turns of his case.
It does.
No dramatic escape attempts, no high-profile interviews.
Right.
Just a slow fade into obscurity.
And in a way, that's fitting.
Yeah.
Serial killers crave notoriety.
Right.
They want their crimes to be remembered, to make them feel powerful even behind bars.
Right.
But in the end, Sanders died a quiet death from a heart attack in 2022. No fanfare, no headlines.
Oh.
Just another statistic in the annals of the prison system.
Almost like a footnote in the story he so desperately wanted to control.
Exactly. The irony's not lost on me.
Yeah.
The man who terrorized so many,
Right.
who sought to leave his mark on the world through violence,
Right.
ultimately ended up as just another name on a prison roster.
Right.
His story fading into the background noise of history.
It's a sobering thought. What stands out to you looking back at Sanders' profile? Was there anything particularly unusual about his background or his methods compared to other serial killers you've studied?
What's fascinating here is that Sanders doesn't fit the classic organized serial killer profile.
Okay.
He wasn't meticulous in covering his tracks.
Right.
And his crimes seemed somewhat opportunistic.
Okay.
He blended into society,
Yeah.
using his job as a truck driver to provide him with both a cover and a hunting ground.
It's a chilling reminder that evil can lurk in the most unexpected places.
It can.
The guy next door, the friendly face at the gas station,
Right.
could harbor dark secrets we can't even begin to fathom.
You make a good point, and I think that brings us to a crucial question that this case raises.
Yeah.
One that is both disturbing and incredibly relevant to your life and the lives of our listeners.
You mentioned a crucial question raised by this case. What exactly did you have in mind?
Well, we've discussed how Sanders used his job as a truck driver to commit his crimes.
Right.
He preyed on hitchhikers, exploiting a mode of transportation that was, back then, far more common than it is today.
You're right. Hitchhiking in the 70s and 80s was almost a rite of passage for some, a symbol of freedom and adventure. But this case, among many others, shattered that illusion.
It did.
Revealing the inherent dangers, especially for young women.
Exactly. And it forces us to consider the complexities of risk assessment in our own lives.
Yeah.
How do we balance our desire for freedom and exploration with a need to protect ourselves? How do we identify potential threats without succumbing to paranoia?
It's a delicate balance, isn't it?
It is.
We don't want to live in fear, but we also can't afford to be naive.
Right.
This case is a stark reminder that evil can lurk in seemingly ordinary places.
It can.
And that we all have a responsibility to be aware of our surroundings and take precautions to protect ourselves and those we care about.
I couldn't agree more. It's not about living in fear. It's about being informed and making smart choices.
Right.
We have to trust our instincts and be willing to speak up if we see something that seems wrong.
Yeah.
If you see someone in a situation that looks unsafe,
Right.
or if something just feels off,
Yeah.
don't hesitate to intervene or contact the authorities. You might just save a life.
It's easy to dismiss these warnings as common sense, but sometimes we need these stark reminders, these real-life examples,
Right?
to shake us out of complacency and make us truly appreciate the importance of personal safety.
Absolutely. And it's not just about protecting ourselves. It's also about being aware of the vulnerabilities of others.
Yeah.
We have a collective responsibility to look out for each other,
Right.
to create a culture of safety and support.
Speaking of collective responsibility, one thing that struck me about this case was the role of chance. If Sanders hadn't confessed to his cellmate,
Right.
would he have ever been caught for the murders of Rhonda Rima and Elizabeth Marks?
It's certainly possible that he could have continued to evade justice for much longer,
Right.
perhaps even indefinitely. That's one of the unsettling aspects of serial crime.
Yeah.
The perpetrators often operate in the shadows, taking advantage of opportunities and vulnerabilities, and leaving behind a trail of devastation that can be difficult to unravel.
It makes you wonder how many other cases out there remain unsolved.
Yeah.
Because that one crucial break, that one lucky piece of evidence or witness testimony, never materialized.
It's a haunting thought.
It is.
And it speaks to the limitations of even the most sophisticated investigating techniques.
Right.
We can't rely solely on forensic science or detective work. Sometimes it comes down to human factors,
Yeah.
to those seemingly insignificant details that can make all the difference.
Like a casual conversation between cellmates,
Right.
or a witness who finally decides to come forward after years of silence.
Exactly. It highlights the importance of encouraging a culture of reporting, of creating an environment where people feel safe and empowered to share information with law enforcement.
Right.
Even if it seems trivial or insignificant, you never know what detail might be the key to cracking a case.
Well, as we wrap up this deep dive, I have to ask, what are the most important takeaways you hope our listener will glean from this case?
On a practical level, I hope this case serves as a reminder to be vigilant about personal safety,
Right.
both for ourselves and for those around us. Trust your instincts, be aware of your surroundings,
Right.
and don't hesitate to report anything suspicious.
Right.
But beyond that, I hope this deep dive has sparked some deeper reflections.
What kinds of reflections?
Reflections about the nature of evil, the complexities of human behavior,
Right.
and the challenges of achieving justice in a world where darkness often hides in plain sight.
Yeah.
We can't simply ignore these uncomfortable truths. We have to confront them head on, learn from them,
Yeah.
and use that knowledge to build a safer and more just world.
You've given us a lot to think about, and I have a feeling our listener, who clearly has a keen interest in this subject matter,
Right.
will appreciate the depth and nuance we've brought to this conversation.
I hope so.
It's been a heavy topic,
Yeah,
but an important one.
I agree. And remember, while it's natural to be fascinated by true crime,
Right.
it's crucial to approach these cases with respect and sensitivity.
Right.
The victims and their families deserve our empathy and our remembrance. Their story should not be forgotten.
Well said. And on that note, we'll bring this deep dive to a close. Thank you for joining us and for sharing your interest in this case with us.
It's been a pleasure.
If you have any further questions or thoughts, please don't hesitate to reach out. And remember, there's always more to learn, more to explore,
Right.
and more ways we can work together to make a difference in the world.